Hey all, welcome back to Most of It. There's been a lot of talk recently about the Grey Knights with the whole Terminus Decree thing, and so I was working on a video about them, and while researching, I was reminded about a piece of lore called the Months of Shame. And initially, I was just going to summarize it, but after reading through it in depth, I realized that this is such an interesting moment in lore that it deserved a video all of its own. So sit down, grab a snack, and listen while I cover the Months of Shame, also known as that time the Space Wolves kicked the Inquisition in its holy balls. So this all started with the First War of Armageddon, when the World Eaters attacked the Hive World of Armageddon. Angron had been playing this battle for years in hopes to reunite his legion after Karn kinda broke it at the Battle of Scalathrax. He was hoping that attacking Armageddon would be enough to bring all of the different warbands of the 12th Legion together, and that they could potentially even make a push toward Terra as a unified front. Unfortunately, Angron's not known for his planning abilities, and it didn't quite work out that way. Angron would pull up into real space aboard his ship with a bunch of troops, including Chaos Cultists and World Eaters, and even the 12 strongest bloodthirsters of Khorne, known as the Cruar Praetoria. And as they took to the planet's surface, about half of the world's defenses were corrupted and joined their attackers. Overall, it would have been a pretty clean win for the Blood God, but unfortunately for them, a guy named Logan Grimnar, chapter master of the Space Wolves, had been assigned to Armageddon's sector. So as the wolves moved over to help the planet, Angron began feeling kinda cocky, and rather than continuing to attack, he and his forces began heaping up mounds of skulls in the name of the Blood God and just kinda acting like they already won. By the time they arrived at the Imperial's defense zone, they found not just the Imperial Guard, but also the Space Wolves. Now, the Wolves are a powerful group, but Grimnar wasn't an idiot. He knew that they were about to face demons, and so he called up the Imperium's local demon hunters, the Grey Knights, and asked them to head over and help them out. While the Wolves were handling the other threats, 109 Grey Knights were handling the more demonic threats, including Angron himself. While the squad that fought him were ultimately successful in banishing him and even broke his sword, all but one of them, named Hyperion, were killed, with only 13 Grey Knights surviving the battle as a whole. Obviously, with their leader gone, the Chaos forces quickly fell apart and were driven off, and the Space Wolves would name Hyperion Bladebreaker for shattering Angron's sword and would honor him with great amounts of respect. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. With the battle over and most of the world's resources destroyed, a task force of the Inquisition would show up and decide what to do next. Now, if you know the Space Wolves, you know that they've never really gotten along with the Inquisition, due to both their lack of traditional chapter structure and their refusal to play along with their orders. Combine this with an Inquisitor that's never been told no, and you're bound to see something interesting. Logan Grimnar knew that the Inquisition would have to suppress the battle, which would include killing most of, if not all of, the Imperial Guard forces. Grimnar argued that it was pointless for them to have fought for the world just to kill the rest of its inhabitants, and also that they deserved to live for fighting so bravely. During the battle, he had even gone through the trouble of isolating and protecting civilians so that they wouldn't see the demons or Grey Knights and thus wouldn't have to be killed. But Inquisitors, being the uptight sticklers that they are, didn't listen and just kinda began doing what they saw fit, assuming that every member of Armageddon's defense forces were tainted and laying out plans for liquidation. Well, Grimnar wasn't about to let millions of innocents die for nothing, and while they were outnumbered by the Inquisition's forces on the ground, the Wolves by far had the larger and better armed fleet in space. So the Wolves would get the people out aboard rescue ships and defend them as they fled. But as the first civilian ship was about to leave, it was destroyed by the Inquisition, killing hundreds of thousands of innocents. The Inquisition was even about to fire on the Space Wolf ships before more of their fleet arrived, forcing them to back down and allowing the other civilian ships to escape. Now, you may think that this was it, but it was just getting started. The Lord Inquisitor, named Kisnaros, wasn't about to take this insult lying down, and he ordered pretty much all of his fleets to exterminate whatever worlds the civilians headed to. This is where the actual Months of Shame began, with that name being coined by the Grey Knights. Dozens of worlds were destroyed and billions were killed, but the Space Wolves were able to hide several vessels and disperse those aboard across several planets, saving millions of lives in the process. Eventually, the Inquisition just decided to start killing the Space Wolves, and even though some of their attempts were successful, the Wolves never retaliated and instead just kept on doing their thing. Soon, though, Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights would come up with the idea to capture Logan Grimnar and get him to tell them where the innocents were and get him to stop. So Kisnaros would ask Grimnar for a parley, to which he agreed, and the two sides would meet unarmed. Except, once the Space Wolf ships would arrive, the Inquisition would open fire and destroy Grimnar's escorts and heavily damage his flagship. Kisnaros would then invite Logan to surrender, to which he would pretend to agree and go aboard the Inquisitor's ship with his Wolf Guard. Kisnaros would give him your standard give up and have peace or keep fighting and be destroyed talk, when Grimnar would say that he hadn't come to surrender, but to find out who had violated their parley oaths. Grandmaster Joros would admit that it was him, to which the Great Wolf quickly beheaded him. Kisnaros would threaten the wolves again, but Grimnar would instead just move to leave. The Grey Knights present would try to psychically stop him from teleporting, to which the wolves killed 4 more of them and teleported back aboard their ship. This, of course, was not how the Inquisition and the Grey Knights wanted this to go. they managed to not only not capture Grimnar, but to also let some of their own get killed. Grimnar had made it clear that he regretted nothing, and so the only path forward was escalation. The wolves were done playing nice with the Inquisition, and began opening fire on them, destroying several Grey Knight vessels, including the Glaive of Janus, which had been the vessel of the First Brotherhood since the end of the Horus Heresy. Kisnaros would call in a chapter of Marines called the Red Hunters, who were essentially a chapter formed by the Inquisition who would often act as his bodyguards, as there were talks of assassinations growing among his ranks. Kisnaros knew that the containment of Armageddon's population was a failure, but he was too far into this to give up, and now his goal was to humble the Space Wolves for damaging his ego so badly. He ordered all of the containment vessels that had been hunting down the civilians to instead mass at Fenris, where they would hold the planet hostage to get Grimnar to not only surrender, but to fold completely and bow to the will of the Inquisition and become a Codex-compliant chapter. While targeting the Fang for orbital bombardment, Kisnaros would ask any ranking Space Wolf to parley, and after teleporting to the world's surface alongside the Red Hunters and the Grey Knight, Hyperion, they would meet with an awakened Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Kisnaros would try to flatter Bjorn by telling him that he was a greater leader than Grimnar, and asked for his assistance in hunting down the Space Wolves that had defied him. Bjorn, however, is an old guy. He's been around the block a few times and saw right through the Inquisitor, telling him that the wolves will not bow to faceless bureaucrats that ruled through position rather than honor and strength. Just as Kisnaros was about to continue the parley, Logan Grimnar's fleets would translate above Fenris after sprinting through the warp. Grimnar would order his forces to attack, and the Inquisition ships would begin bombarding the Fang, with Grimnar and his Wolfguard teleporting aboard them to sort things out. While his Wolfguard handled the Grey Knights protecting the Inquisitor, Grimnar sprinted to Kisnaros, and despite the Inquisitor apparently being a decently powerful psyker, Logan was able to decapitate him. This wasn't enough for the wolves, however, and they continued to rampage through the Inquisition's forces and killed pretty much everyone that had dared to threaten their homeworld, until Bjorn the Fell-Handed teleported aboard and managed to talk the young wolves down. He would essentially gather the kids together and tell them to stop fighting, telling Grimnar to cease his assault and telling Hyperion that inquisitorial ships will never again appear over Fenris, and that the Space Wolves' ranks should be educated on the Grey Knight's purpose as to prevent another conflict from erupting again. Ultimately, both sides would accept these terms more so out of necessity than willingness, as they were both on needlessly destructive paths. The Space Wolves and the Inquisition would obviously have serious trust issues from here on out, even worse than before, with the Inquisition still secretly plotting on ways to control the Space Wolves, and the Wolves in turn laying their own plans for the next inevitable conflict with the Imperium's elites. So that was a rundown on the Months of Shame, and personally, this is one of my favorite pieces of 40k lore. Let's be real here, no one likes the Inquisition, and seeing them get kicked in the balls is just so satisfying. This is also one of those stories that demonstrates the Space Wolves' humanity. The Salamanders are widely known as the Save Innocence chapter, but it's often forgotten that the Space Wolves agree with them on that philosophy for the most part. The Space Wolves believe in defending those weaker than them, and that's exactly what they did in this story. Also, personally, I do not like the Grey Knights in lore, and so seeing them just get dunked on by my favorite chapter is really fun as well. One of the most interesting things about this story to me is that it demonstrates just how much the Space Wolves, but Logan Grimnar in particular, are not to be messed with, as they were one of the few groups to battle the Inquisition and not just come out on top, but actually get them to give up for nothing in return. Bjorn convinced the Inquisition to give up some of their secrets and stop their campaigns just for the promise that Grimnar would stop fighting them. Just dang. And probably the biggest question from this story, who the heck was Kisnaros? I mean, I looked and there's no lore about him pre-war for Armageddon, but he obviously commanded a lot of power, seeing that he was able to commit so many resources to hunting the Space Wolves. And you throw in that he was apparently a decent psyker, and he's just such an enigma that it kind of leads me to believe that he was like the Changeling or another Tzeentch demon in disguise, but who knows. There's also the idea that the very highest positions of the Inquisition potentially want the Space Wolves destroyed, which I could see, and which I think demonstrates the fact that the Imperium's kind of lucky that the Wolves are as loyal as they are, because if they can do this when they were mostly playing defensive, imagine what they could do if they went full traitor. I mean, they were able to counter like the most elite Space Marine chapter and come out the other side without being erased from Imperial records. Some may say that I'm glazing the wolves, and yeah, I am, but still, the Months of Shame really shows how powerful they are. But what do y'all think of the Months of Shame? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know what videos you'd like to see from me in the future. Be sure to check out my community tab where I post memes and run polls from time to time, and with all that said, y'all have a great day, and I'll see y'all later.